can get this working. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. So hello, and thank you for all coming today. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I work a lot with new startups, and there's something just really extra exciting about new ideas and teams working through those early concept stages. And we're in a very weird time for the games industry at the moment. I probably don't have to tell you that. And I genuinely think that the future of what is a game studio is changing, and I want to talk a bit more about that in today's session. Before we get stuck in, I just want to reassure you that today's talk is for everyone interested in making games as a career. So whether you're already running a studio, just about to take the leap, or still figuring out whether this is something that you want to do one day, then don't worry, you're in exactly the right place. You're welcome to ask questions at the end, but I just want to make it clear that you don't have to have any previous experience to use some of the tools and tips that I'm going to give you today. So, where to begin on running a game studio? I once worked with a founder who told me, we're not really a studio yet because it's just the three of us working on a prototype. But when we looked at what was actually happening, they had deadlines, milestones to achieve, contracts in place, some overhead costs, and people relying on them. And that is already a studio in my book. And that feeling of not quite being ready or not official enough is something that I hear all the time in games. But the truth is, the moment that you start acting like a studio is the moment that you become one. And it can be difficult to recognize at what stage you need to start doing all of the different business things in order to support your startup. At what point does making something with friends turn into running a business? That line can get really blurry very quickly, and especially now when a lot of university courses and incubators are encouraging startup-style teamwork and push early career developers to formalize their ideas into playable demos. And there's often this rush to build momentum, to keep going and make the game real and publish something. But in all of that excitement, it's really easy to miss that you're actually in your first year of running a studio, a business, and it gets pushed aside by these deadlines and pitching and scope changes. And then, of course, you're taken up with looking for funding, but you've started the business already. And ironically, many of the studios that I get called in to support, especially when something has gone wrong, have often been built on exactly those shaky foundations. They're led by really smart, passionate, and brilliant people who are totally committed to their project, but nobody has had the time to sit down and ask, what are we actually doing? And I've said many times before that making games is difficult, but not always in the way that we think it's going to be. We often prepare for the technical challenges, we plan for production risks, but we don't always prepare for the difficult conversations, the financial pressure, the shifting roles that we have to play and manage, and the legal grey areas that we're going to encounter. And the moment when you realize that your job is no longer about building a great game, but it's about leading the people who are trying to build it with you. I teach leadership, but when I ask people to define what that actually means, they often pause and they stumble. Because leadership isn't one fixed thing, it's a construct, it's an idea, and it depends on the kind of game that you want to make and the team that you've got versus the team that you need. It depends on your strengths, your values, your weaknesses, your business goals, and your boundaries. And often when new startups come to me, they ask me to teach them leadership. But the truth is that there isn't a magical formula that I can give to you, and you automatically become this kind of better leader. Leadership is something that you are going to have to actively build, and you will continue to build it alongside your business. So your first year of running a studio is going to be a wild time. Anyone that's already done it will tell you that. And whether you're prepared for it or not, and you're going to make loads of mistakes. And that's just part of the process. And a lot of startups think that good leadership is about never making any mistakes. We're just going to sail through and be successful. Whereas actually good leadership is about learning how to ask the right questions when you totally mess up. So that's what this talk is going to be about at its core. It's not about teaching you how to run a studio the right way. It's about helping you to understand where to focus your energy now and how to make more conscious choices and how to build something sustainable for yourself and your team and the types of games that you want to make. Before we get into all of that, I just want to introduce myself properly and give you a bit of context as to where I'm pulling all of these insights from. So my name is Melissa Phillips. You can call me Mel. I'm the founder of Games Leadership, and I work with studios across the industry, from small indies to global teams, and I support current and emerging leaders with the setup, running and daily management of their studios. I'm a qualified coach and have a background in psychology, with over a decade of working in the games industry in productions, operations and studio leadership. And I'm still making games today, which I think is really important. I've just lost my mouse, here we go. And through Games Leadership, we offer leadership training, workshops and coaching for the games industry, which is home to our signature 12-week online leadership training course, and that's called the Games Leadership Blueprint. And I've worked with over 300 individual games industry leaders in the last 2 years. And what's interesting is that we're starting to see patterns, some that we definitely already knew were there, but it's allowing us to kind of adapt and begin to create frameworks which answer some of the challenges that the games industry is experiencing at the moment. So that is my passion project at the moment, is figuring out what we can do better. Here's a quick look at what we'll be covering today. So I'm going to start by talking about the current industry and give you some of the context for what a new studio looks like in this current climate. Then we're going to talk about what success looks like in that context and in the context of your first year, followed by exploring the top 5 core areas that I think matter most in your first year as a studio. Then I'll cover what I wish I had known when I did this myself. And before we wrap up, and if there's any time left over, I'm happy to use that time to answer any questions, or I'll stick around at the end if you want to come and speak to me individually. Also, very welcome to take pictures during this talk and share any of this on social media if you wish. Feel free to tag us in at Games Leadership or me myself. You can find all of us on LinkedIn. And by the end of today's talk, I want you to be able to do 2 things. So first, I want you to identify the 5 core areas that really matter for you in your first year of running a studio, and they might match what I'm about to show you, or you might have some of your own to add in there that are more personal for you. But I'd like you to identify those areas and the spaces that tend to cause the most confusion or pressure or surprise for you, and I'm going to give you 5 to think about right away, and some ways in which I manage those if I was going to do a new studio right now. And then second, I'd like you to reflect on the kind of leader that you want to be and what your studio actually needs from you right now in this moment. Because every studio is different and your leadership style doesn't need to look like anyone else's, but it does need to be intentional. So I'd love, if you're also feeling really clever, for you to be able to link what your studio needs from you right now back into your top 5 core areas that you need to focus on. And that's how you're going to make the most of this talk. Okay, so before I cover the more practical bits on running a studio, I just want to take a moment to talk about the wider context that we're all operating in. We are in a really strange time for the games industry. You know that. Whether you've seen the headlines or not, you've heard people talking about it, or maybe you've been directly affected yourself. There's no escaping the fact that the last 2 years have brought a lot of instability. We've had mass layoffs, we've had cancelled projects, we've got shrinking funding pools, and just a general increase in pressure and panic and just bad feelings. But at the same time, something else is happening. We are starting to see this rise in new studios. More people are setting up their own companies, more small teams are breaking away from big organizations and starting to try something different. And I think that's going to change the definition of what a game studio even is. I think we're right at this pinnacle of something really exciting starting to happen. We're seeing more teams that are remote by default, especially in indies. And we're also seeing a shift towards studios that are more business focused, not just creating a great game, but thinking more sustainably about the future and what lies beyond releasing that first game. I'm seeing studios now do their 5 and 10-year plans. And there's not one right way to build a studio anymore, but there are some common pitfalls and practical things that can help make it feel less chaotic. So with that in mind, let's just pause and ask a very simple question. And that is, what does success look like to you in your first year? Because if I asked 5 different studio founders what success means, then I'm going to get 5 really different answers. Some people will say it's about releasing a game. Others will say it's securing funding, or building a team, or signing with a publisher. And for some, it's simply about proving that they can take that first big step and get something playable up and running, get that demo out. And all of those definitions are totally valid. But in my experience, the first year rarely goes exactly how you expect it to go. So the goals that you set at the beginning often shift. The project evolves, the people change, new pressures come in, and so many early stage founders end up feeling like they've failed in that first year, not because they have, but because they were working on someone else's definition of what success looks like for them. So sometimes success in year 1 is just about making it through the year with your team still intact. Sometimes it's learning how to have those difficult conversations or how to communicate when you disagree. Sometimes it's getting better at understanding what kind of work actually suits you, or realizing that your first idea isn't quite right, but now you have the experience to build something better. And there's often this belief that success needs to be really loud. It's got to look like a big launch or a glowing press release or a massive round of funding. But so often, success in the first year is really quiet. It's internal. It's about staying curious, staying open, being willing to learn as you go, and figuring out what works for that specific team of individuals. So before we go any further, I just want you to take a moment and think just quietly about what success might look like for you right now. So not what you think it's supposed to look like, not what you've seen on a pitch deck or LinkedIn or any other social media. What would actually make you feel proud or grounded or even excited to see for yourself in the next year? And I want to imagine that we're having a coffee in the forum a year from now. What would you like to be telling me when I ask, how's it going? So success is a fascinating thing. It's a topic that I study regularly in the clients that I work with. And it's also a subject that big game publishers have been trying to crack themselves. They're investing millions of dollars into trying to predict what will make a game successful. And so far, we don't have an answer, or at least not something that felt like it's the perfect formula. Because if we did, everybody would be doing the same thing. And we would have every single game that one of those big publishers, EA, Sony, Ubisoft puts out would be an overnight success. Something that we do have, however, is data on business and what businesses can do, not to guarantee success, but to set themselves up in a way that is more stable and structured. And we definitely see elements of success in business play a role in success, or at least in setting our team up for success in game startups. So let's talk about what that first year involves. And like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot thrown at you in this first year. But I've identified 5 core areas that I believe every studio needs to pay attention to if they want to build something more sustainable. And these are based on common themes that I've seen again and again in the various studios that I work in. So if we put all of these together, we've given it a nice memorable alternative name, the Games Leadership Foundational 5. And this covers vision, money, your team, legal, and then you, the leader. And if you're a new studio just starting up, then please use this as a planning tool to help you think through the different areas in which you might build your business. If you've already started, then I'd recommend that you use this as a bit of a health check on running your current studio and make sure that there aren't any areas that you might be neglecting. So I'm going to quickly run you through these foundational 5 pillars for managing a game startup. And the first foundation I'm going to start with is vision, because often this gets really misunderstood. So A lot of people presume that this just relates to the game that you're making, but vision is also important in the context of running a studio. So your studio's vision is about what you're trying to do and how you plan to get there, not just what you're making. It's why are you making it? Who are you making it for? And the kind of business and working environment that you want to create along the way. And this really links back to kind of that earlier question I asked you on what does success look like to you? Because being really clear about your studio vision can actually help guide your business as it becomes a thing that you can use to help assess those decisions that feel most important to the studio. So does it fit with your overall vision or not can be a very useful question when you've got some choices in front of you. And something I see happen all of the time is that a team will start out with a strong creative idea for their game, but the moment that pressure comes in, and that can be financial, emotional, maybe external issues, then the team very quickly loses focus on what it is that they're actually making. So scope for a project can change really suddenly when we lose track of vision. And a sign that things are going wrong is if I start to ask different people on your team, what are we making? Then each one is going to start to tell me something different. So vision is not about being an amazing auteur. It's about something that you return to when things get really chaotic. So it's a way to check in with yourself and your team and ask, are we building the thing that we set out to build? Are we still doing that? And if not, do we know why we've shifted? So every early decision you make, from who you hire, to how you spend money, to which opportunities you're going to say yes or no to, it's much easier to navigate if you know what you're actually building towards. So take time to define your studio's vision early on. And you'll see that I've popped up some prompts for you to think about what studio vision might mean to you. So what are we making? Why are we making it? And what will success look like for this particular project and maybe for the wider studio? And then we can start to bring this together, and I can even ask or add in, how does our game vision meet our wider studio vision? Because I promise you that they are going to interact and be connected in some way. And if they don't, maybe we have a problem there. The second foundation I want to explore is money. And we all worry about this. It's everybody's worry as soon as we start a new business. It's another area that we often underestimate, especially in all creative startups. We see this in film, television, games. The less experienced we are in creating a project, then the more challenging it can be to predict just how much it's going to cost. So if it's your first time, you're going to make mistakes in money. Absolutely. One of the most helpful things you can do early on is actually just take the time to ask, what does it cost to run this thing? And I don't just mean like the best case scenario, but I also mean the worst case too. So a lot of studios think that they're not ready to talk about money yet when they first start up. They think it's something that's going to happen after the prototype is done, or after they get a grant, or after they pitch to a publisher. But by the time you're in those conversations, it's too late to start figuring out your numbers. So money is not just about securing funding, it's about understanding what things cost. And ultimately a business skill that even the least mathematical of us can learn. I promise you, I'm not very mathematical, but I do understand business, and I've taught myself to do that. So when I'm setting up new budgets with a team, then I often use phrases like skimmed, semi-skimmed, and full fat. And what that actually means is I usually create at least 3 different budgets for a project. So I have the low end, a skimmed version of the budget, and that just keeps the lights on, keeps us all fed. I have a mid-range version, which is usually the version that we get, and that gets us through production comfortably, but probably doesn't make the next game or get us any further than that. And then I have a full fat version that allows us to scale and experiment. So if more financial padding comes through, then we get to do a bit more on that. We don't have to be so strict on the production schedule. We can maybe change a few things. Scopes change, brilliant. We can add some more outsourcing. And I see so many studios try to run everything really informally at this stage. So like running costs through a personal bank account, not tracking time or expenses, not properly separating what belongs to the company and what belongs to the individuals building it. And it might feel easier in the moment to do that, but it becomes incredibly difficult to unravel as things start to grow. And I can't build a budget if you haven't been tracking those things early on. It becomes much more difficult for me to come in and be like, well, I don't know, how long have you spent making this? How many hours a day are people working on this? So crucial to take the time just to get those things in order right at the start. And I know it's boring, but it's super helpful when we're trying to build a business plan. And I'm not saying that you have to be financial controller from month one, but you do need to have a basic system in place, or at least some basic understanding about how the business is going to work. So at the very least, I need you to know where the money is kept, where it's going, and how you're going to manage it. And like I said, this is a whole skill set in itself. And I honestly think that we're going to start to see publishers wanting evidence of business management now before funding new studios in the future. It's going to be a really important skill for us to take on board and start to force ourselves to learn. And when we talk about money in your first year, we're not actually talking about being rich or even being profitable. Most studios make a loss at least for their first 3 to 5 years because they're relying on investor funds. There is no profit until they release a game. What we're talking about is simply being realistic. And by that, I mean knowing how long you can survive on the current funds that you're doing. So if you are bootstrapping, that means putting your own money into this to try and get from one stage to the next. Being realistic about how that looks and how long you can continue to do that. What can you actually afford? And how do you communicate that? And this is the most important bit. How do you communicate that clearly to the people that you are asking to take part in this? They also deserve to be on the knowledge side of this, of how much money have we actually got and how are we going to make this work? So money is super emotional, it's vulnerable, and it brings up lots of different feelings. Especially when it's tight, that's when it's going to test you the most. But also important to make space for it early on so that your financial reality supports your creative one and not the other way around. Next foundational pillar is the team. Really tempting at the beginning to think of your team as just the people making this thing with me, and they're normally friends, collaborators, that person that you worked with in uni, the person that you trust to make great art or handle systems design whilst you do all the writing. And that can absolutely work until it doesn't. And one of the biggest cracks that I see in new studios comes from that lack of clarity around how you want this team to work together, not just what you want them to do. So a lot of studios have conflict around communication. Every single studio that I work with will tell me that they need to get better at communicating. Even the ones that I'm like, you have got everything sorted out. They're like, no, but we don't communicate well. Every single studio. And there's often a confusion about how these decisions are made. So what is my role and responsibility? They're often not clear. Or people aren't sure how to speak up and have conversations when things aren't working. Again, this doesn't have to be rigid. You don't need like full singing or dancing HR policy in your first month, but you do need to have a shared understanding about how you're going to show up for each other. Every studio has a culture, whether it chooses to or not. And the way that your team interacts early on is going to set that tone for everything that follows. So this is also when inclusivity starts, not just in who you hire, but how you're going to build this space. So are you making room for different needs, different working styles, different perspectives? Are you creating an environment where people feel safe to ask questions? Your team is your studio. So it's not just a group of people helping you finish a prototype. It's an environment that you are building, and it will ultimately reflect who you are as a leader. Lots of people just try and pull in roles and anyone good enough for the job, but remember that it is also a reflection of who you are. So take the time to ask, who are you working with and why? How do you want them to work together? And how are you setting that studio up to support that from the beginning? And you're going to see a couple of prompts on the slide to help you thinking about what you might get clearer on. So having clear roles and responsibilities is a really big one. I see new teams get a little shy about this. They don't want to tell people what to do. But I have this saying that clear is kind. So people often just want clarity. Like they don't need you to be super nice to them. Just tell me what you need from me. And often that feels much better than kind of us doing this dance If you can tell me what my role involves and you can give me permission around that role, it's much easier for me to own that and then make decisions than it is to try and guess or jostle with other teammates as to who's meant to be doing what in that task. Fourth foundation is legal. And I know, because this includes myself, a lot of people, this is the bit that you just rather ignore. And I get it. Legal can feel really scary or like something that you just don't need to worry about until it becomes a thing. But I promise you, getting ahead of this now is going to save you a world of pain later. So I've been in this situation where I'm starting a business and the legal side of things just feels really dry. Even just the paperwork around starting a business feels like it's written in some sort of ancient language. And I've really had to push myself to kind of sit with those different legal pieces. And like with money, it's absolutely something you can learn. It's just about getting more comfortable with the language and the requirements around that paperwork. And every studio, no matter how small, needs to think about a few core legal essentials in their first year. So a massive one is contracts. Anything that surrounds hiring or possibly firing a team. Contracts are something that you're going to be using all the way through the game making process, so it's really important for you to get those sorted early on. You can budget for those. So legal fees for an employment contract usually start around 1,500, but they can go much higher than that as well. I sit on the board at Yuki, and we work very closely at the moment with Harbottle and Lewis, and they share free employment contracts to members on the Yuki website, so you can just go and have a look, check that out, download them if you're curious as to what an employment contract looks like. They do separate contracts for like full-time employees and contractors. So I think you have to be a member, but definitely give Yuki a nudge and see if you can take a look at those. You're going to need employment contracts that you're fully happy with before you hire anyone, and that includes your friends, maybe especially your friends. IP and ownership is also a big one. So one of the most common problems I see is that when a studio starts to grow or attract interest, but nobody's actually agreed who owns what. So I've seen teams lose publishing deals because they couldn't prove their IP ownership. I've seen co-founders fall out because nothing was written down. And I've seen games go live and no contracts in place at all, which is fine until somebody has an issue with it, or wants their name removed, or wants to walk away, or wants to claim a percentage. So here's my advice, and that is write things down early, even if it feels really awkward, even if you trust each other completely. Clarity protects that relationship. It doesn't have to mean a 20-page contract, but it just means that everyone needs to know where they stand. IP, slightly different to copyright, is also something that is worth budgeting for. So often people think that owning a limited company protects their studio name and then maybe their game name by extension. But nothing is properly protected unless you own a registered trademark. So whilst owning a limited company can definitely assist in your claim, it's owning the registered trademark that actually provides the legal protection. And this can be a really big process. And I'm not a lawyer, but I want to stress that IP ownership is starting to get more and more important now in games. And it does need attention and budget and professional support for how you do this. So always add that in, consider that when your finances allow. How do I protect my IP? How do I get that registered trademark? Finally, another big legal requirement is business insurance. In the UK, all employers are required to have employer's liability insurance at the very least to operate as a business. This is a legal requirement and something that you should be budgeting for because it can be expensive. Also worth mentioning that many insurance companies don't cover game studios, and they won't always tell you this when you try and sign up. So that's fun. So I recommend finding a really good games insurance broker. They do exist. There's a couple of them. to make sure that you're getting the correct cover and not ignoring the small print in the random business insurance that you can get online that says games, this includes everything other than games. So make sure you do that. And also, I know that was a lot of information to throw at you all at once, and I don't want to overwhelm, but some of the biggest legal areas that I could see done better in studios, or at the very least be considered, are things about like, how are we structuring the studio? So are you a limited company? Are you a partnership? Are you using your personal bank account to pay freelancers, or have you been able to separate things properly? And this is where it gets super boring. These decisions matter. And this is not just from a tax perspective and making things easier for when an accountant comes in and has to do your end of year. But it's also important for credibility and often legal clarity. So the moment that you start applying for grants or working with publishers, people are going to expect a certain level of formality. So some grants can't be awarded unless you have a business bank account. And just to make it even more silly, some grants can't be awarded unless you own a business bank account and you have operated with that business bank account for over a year. So if you haven't got your business bank account set up, you're still a year out from being able to apply for some of those grants. Stupid, I know, but here we are. The system's broken, it's not your fault, is my answer to that. We just haven't quite figured out how game studios are running yet, and they're not fitting in with that local funding space. So legal stuff isn't just admin or some floating scary entity. It's about how you protect the thing that you are building, and you can do that right from the start. Again, I realize this is super dry and intimidating, but it does encompass some of the most important decisions that you can make at the start of your journey. But it also has the potential to make things a lot smoother for you later on if you can get these in place. And I've definitely been in those conversations with publishers where they're like, oh, I assume you own the IP. And I'm like, yes, we do. We've got that sorted year one. And we sail through that because we've secured it. So now we come to the final foundation, and this one is about you, the leader themselves, because yes, you're building a studio. Yes, you're making a game, but you're also carrying a huge amount on your shoulders. So often in startups, some person is doing the leading. They're also the person doing everything else. And this is a double-edged sword, because you can have the best plan, the best team, the best funding, and you can still find yourself totally stuck. And that's, again, not because your studio is broken, but because you are exhausted. You're uncertain, or you're spread too thin now to lead it. Your first attempt as well is going to feel massively personal. I've made this mistake myself, where I put way too much of my own identity into a studio, and I gave so much of myself that it became difficult to see what it actually needed and how best to support it. So I stopped being able to view it from the outside or detach from that non-work space. And I worked without holiday for the first entire year, which was very silly, to say the least. So when I talk about leadership in the first year, a lot of what is needed is about finding that sort of presence that you want to bring into a studio. And many people mistake leadership for being confident, but it's much more complicated than that. And your first year is a great time for you to be exploring all of those things. So leadership in your first year is about recognizing your influence and your patterns, your values, and showing up in a way that's actually going to help to move that studio forward. And that includes when things go horribly wrong. So I'm beginning to wrap up now, but before I do, I wanted to share a learning that I've had from my personal experience of creating new businesses. And this one seems brutal, but nobody cares. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. If I look back, I spent so much time worrying about starting a business that I was always able to kind of talk myself out of doing it. I was so worried about what people might think or say, or how they might react if I failed. But the reality is that everybody is kind of very much wrapped up in their own individual lives, and they're too busy worrying about their own worries. So nobody really cares about the boring business decisions that you're making in the background. Nobody cares is also useful to bear in mind when you're pitching. And again, in the nicest possible way, business partners, investors, and publishers will see hundreds of pitches every single week. Their business is to look at businesses. And so a big mistake that I see devs make is that they expect those people to care as much about the game that they're making as they do. And the reality is that whilst business people do care about games, they don't have to care about your game. Nobody cares also means that unless I'm making huge illegal mistakes that warrant further investigation because I've been so terribly awful, then it's okay for me to make mistakes really early on as long as I'm learning from them. Nobody's looking at you too deeply at the start. You can make those mistakes, learn from them, do better next time. And I expect new studios not to know everything and to have some weird stuff happening. And the majority of the time, so long as it's not damaging to others or in desperate need of like legal intervention, then I don't care. I don't care if your art isn't perfect or if your code is buggy or if you're not sure if you've hired the right team or if you don't know what VGTR is, because all of those things you can learn, I can teach you, it's all fine. So what I'm actually trying to say is, nobody cares, so relax. Take some of that pressure off yourself and focus instead on building a studio that feels like it's a reflection of you and the culture that you want to build. So, in your first year, there are 5 areas that I will always ask for your attention. Your vision, the money, your team, the legal structure, and you, the person trying to hold it all together. And I think the stronger that these foundations are, the more resilient your studio becomes. Leadership isn't something that you're handed, it's something that you're going to be actively building. And you won't always get it right, but you will learn and you will get clearer and you will get steadier. So as you step into your first year or whatever stage you're currently at, then don't just focus on building the game, focus on building the studio. And also don't forget to build yourself as you go along. So thank you very much for being here today. I can't wait to see what you're all going to build. Love to see it. Please do get in touch and let me know. If you'd like to keep in touch and make use of some of the resources that we share over at Games Leadership, then you can find us at Games Leadership on pretty much all socials listed here or at www.gamesleadership.com. Thank you.